Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. We're going to look at 7 award-winning cheats for a successful intranet. I'm Nigel Williams. I'm our head of customer insight. Now this basically means I'm a customer geek. I find out how all the different organisations are working, what the great things they're doing, and then just look at how we can share that practice. So where traditionally we might look at people in the same sector as ourselves, as our competitors, quite often we find of our customers that they're learning from different companies in completely different industries, completely different locations, but are facing very similar challenges. And they're doing that via our online communities, via our various customer meetups, and the various channels we run through. Now today is all about asking questions. If anything jumps out to you at all, please just feel free to use the questions tab, as you can see on the right hand side. Type in whatever you need, and I look forward to being able to answer that for you. We're actually going to use this for 2 different purposes today as well, because I'd love to also hear about any of the mission statements you have for your intranet. And when we talk about a mission statement, this is how you describe to somebody in 10 seconds, what is it your intranet does? If you face an employee, how would you describe that? And when we come on to the last section of this presentation, we're actually going to look at those examples, what you've come back with, and how we can start working on maybe improving those or even maximizing the great work you've done already. So there are 5 key takeaways I want you to be able to have today. The first one is to have a clearer picture of people's roles and their needs within the intranet. This sounds remarkably easy for somebody like me to say when I work in an intranet organisation, but I fully appreciate how complex organisations are. So today's plan is to give you a very simple approach for how to start breaking this down and removing some of that mystery that can exist. It's also about understanding your intranet team and champions, and this might be critical whether you're building your intranet at the moment, whether you're looking at starting an intranet, or even if you've got an existing intranet and you're looking to revise who you've got who's bringing back requirements across the business and helping you understand what you can do to keep evolving your site. The thing that I'll keep reiterating, and I'll sound like a broken record to use an English parlance on this, is the importance of thinking of your workforce as people. What are the drivers for them? It's not enough to just say this is part of your job. What is it we can do to actively engage people and make them want to be a part of this success? We also want to try and understand the intranet's need as a broader business tool as well. What is it the business needs this intranet to do? And then how do we get those people in the workforce that we looked at in the last point to actually come online with that as well? And then how do we measure that usage and adoption? How do we spot where we're failing or actually where we're having massive successes? And not just how do we spot it, but then how do we translate to other parts of the organization so it has a meaning for them as a business purpose? And we're going to do this through various segments. So we're going to run through 7 segments today, most of which, as we've promised in the title and in the preamble for this webinar, are going to give you an example of a customer of ours as well, how they've had major international success, what they're doing next, and then a quick takeaway exercise for how you can start those routes yourself. So firstly, it's about understanding your hierarchy, and that starts quite naturally with your intranet team. Now less than 5% of our customers have a full-time intranet manager, so when we say an intranet team, I'm not trying to scare you here with the idea that there might be 5 people, 10 people, hundreds of people on your intranet team. What we're talking about here are the people who have the core responsibility. What happens, for example, when a core decision needs to be made with your site, whether that's changing the design or maybe incorporating a change into information architecture? It's going to be your core team that makes that decision. And as I say, that core team might be a person of 1. It might be a group of you who've each got a specific role within your intranet. Then we've got our directors and sponsors, and these guys will obviously make themselves clear when we're starting our project that if somebody's investing money, they're going to want to know what it returns and have a very strong opinion about what it does. But at the same time, it's important to remember that our directors are only one very small group of our users. Whilst you should always train them as users so they become comfortable using your site, for example, we see customers who've now got directors taking selfies, for example, as well as actively blogging, whilst there'll be other companies who still actively use ghostwriters. But it's important that we understand our directors, what it is they're investing for, and what kind of measures they need to understand the success that you're putting in. Then we have our champions, and our champions are the people dotted around the business who are our eyes and ears. They help us understand how we can start solving more pain points, what changes are happening in their locations, in their departments, and how that impact can happen. And then we get our workforce. And these are the people that broadly get tarnished as users, but one of the things we're looking today is to try and break this down further so you can start to understand what the difference between your worker types, what different approaches can you need. Now typically when I work with companies, they're particularly good at having a great discourse with their champions, particularly when they go live. That may start to dwindle as you go into your business as usual phase, and one of the things we want to look at today is how to make that stronger. And we tend to be particularly good at how we do our launch comms to our workplace as well. So we'll get it out to our employees. One of the things we don't help our groups with is just closing that gap at the bottom. So how do we help our champions to start engaging the workforce more? How do we get the workforce comfortable to start feeding back? Because whilst you might be seen as an internal comms team, a marketing team, for example, you may always be associated with head office. And when you look at these hard to reach audiences, they may not want to speak to head office. They may want to speak to people like them. And that's where your champions can be so critical. So what makes a champion? If we look at somebody like Kent Community Health NHS, they've got an absolutely fantastic looking site, and the impact it's had upon their organisation is incredible. Now a lot of their workforce work out in the field. They're district nurses. They may be moving between homes. The only technology they have is with an iPad, and that might be limited access depending on the activity they're trying to do. So they've had to go out and they've had to try and understand, well, what does it mean to be one of these district nurses? How do we get these people to be a success? And the results have been they've got 88% of the organisation now using their site on a daily basis. It really is an essential tool. And it's meant that things such as teams have cropped up now. So these people who may have traditionally been difficult to reach are now going off in their specialisms and creating team spaces, having various discussions. And teams have been one of those things that's a great situation for your intranet. We work with police forces, for example, and one of those does their missing persons cases pass between departments and between different police stations using their online teams. They're very flexible. They give you a great way to be a success. But Kent Community Health NHS have just done a fantastic job of making it work for them. So when you come to the site, it becomes instantly obvious that it's tablet friendly. Everything's been designed tablet outward. So even though Interact, for example, is responsibly designed or will automatically shape itself to whichever device you use, they're aware that rather than building it from a laptop for a device-driven audience, they've built it based on the device first and scoped it out. You'll notice the big buttons. It's very easy on a touchscreen on a tablet, for example, to press to exactly what you need. There's very little typing involved to get to exactly what you want. And we see this move all the way through to training, for example. Training is always going to be a massive aspect of your intranet and a massive pull to get people to use your intranet too. But as you see here, it's very simple to know what you're pressing. There's very little reticence going to be involved. When I see IT skills, I know exactly what it's going to involve for me. And this has been expanded out into their practical work as well. So it's not only coming to the internet to do something outside of your core work, but how do we make that core work really be effective for you? So I might be out with a patient and I'm seeing signs that they're confused. Now I can start going into the dementia section and start to get a greater breakdown to be able to diagnose a little bit more about what problems they may face, what I need to know, any policies or guidance for how I treat those patients as well. And this incredible design has just seen this site take off for Kent NHS. It's just been such a great success, and it's partly due to the drive of Andy and his team, but also down to just how simple the site is to use for the people it's built for. When I come to use this intranet, I don't feel like a second-class citizen. I don't feel like I'm using a head office tool, for example, and being forced to use it to do my day job. It's actually something that actively makes my role simpler, easier, and quicker. So they've done all this via their champions, that rather than just sitting there in an office and trying to understand how things work, they've obviously done plenty of workshops, and we're going to focus on those workshops again soon. But they've also focused on getting the right people in as a champion. So when we talk about a champion, we're looking at various aspects. And I'm just going to borrow the image we used before from dementia and try and repurpose it slightly for how we define a champion. So one of the risks we see with internet champions is that we get the person who's available, maybe not the person who's the best person to give a reflection of that department or location. So we want somebody who's smart, somebody who's constantly looking at the problems and thinking, okay, how would our internet be able to solve this? We want them to be looking at their eyes as well. So it's not just looking at the problems as they see them, or maybe with the senior members of the team they work with, but what is it they see happening as well? What is it they constantly see coming through as the same questions, as the same pain points? Who do they see who constantly don't use the resources available because of technical limitations, for example, or any challenges that may sit there? We want them to use their hands as well, because we want them to be hands-on. We want them to be able to actually get involved, whether that's answering people's questions, whether that's training them for how to use the site. It's absolutely critical that they want to get involved in the absolute success of your intranet and their department. And we want them to be using their mouths because we want them to be our cheerleaders. We want them to be telling people just how great the site is. If they've got requirements come from their department and you've gone and made that happen and it's suddenly easier, it's simpler, we want them to be shouting about it and also getting those quotes from you from who else is using it and what it means to them. And this is going to mean a lot of feet and legs because it's going to involve a lot of constant work. It might be, for example, them answering specific forums. It may be them having to run various trainer-trainer sessions in their locations. But they've got to be prepared to really be engaged in the success of your internet and how they see that working. Now, when they come to look at this part as well, what we want them to look out for are news contributions from employees. And we're going to come on to this later in the webinar. We want to make sure that people know how to use the site because technophobia can still be a massive challenge. If I come to use it and I can't get what I want to do instantly, I'm going to revert back to type, be that email, be that going to ask somebody specifically or phoning them up, for example. We want them to be gathering new requirements. Tell us what pain points are still there. Great, we've solved your first few. What do we do next? We want them to engage your stakeholders as well, particularly those in their functions and departments, because when they win these guys over to believe that the internet's the way to do things, you'll find that it really does become that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We want them to encourage collaboration, to take the fear factor out. Now, this might be them contributing to various threads, for example, to start with, or maybe writing a few blogs. But they're leading by example. I often use the analogy of restaurants, that if you go past an empty restaurant, nobody ever wants to go into it. But if you go past a busy restaurant, you assume it's great. And collaboration works exactly the same way, that people tend to follow type to make that a big success via your champions. But there's also the more traditional aspects as well. So you want them to constantly audit the content that's there. Is something still relevant? Has it been usurped by a new version? Can we make sure there's one master version of what's happening here? This is one of the other reasons that people come to your site, because they start to trust the content they see. So content auditing, although it will never be the most exciting part of someone's role as a champion, is absolutely critical to what they do. And finally, we want them to try and help us understand which measures they need to be reporting back to their stakeholders to continue the success. So we're coming on to rethinking your audience. And if we take an example of Make-A-Wish Foundation, they've just won the Best Value to Employees at the Reagan Comms Awards. And 50% of their people are using their site every day. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, in the old days, they had 62 chapters dotted around America, and each of those chapters was very individual. So they'd stick to the old habits, for example. They would make sure that they probably only ever chatted to people who were sat near them. And the only time they'd really come to the intranet was if they wanted to find a document or a process, for example. However, they've managed to massively transform this. So whilst there's still a massive legacy of the transactional need, because that's what people are telling them they need across their home pages, we're also seeing great questions like this come up, which suddenly break down those barriers between the various chapters. So, for example, what do we do with a sibling? We're making a wish happen for one of our charity causes, and they've got brothers and sisters, and they can quite often feel like they're being left out on the sidelines. So how do we actually engage these guys? So, for example, we could include a shirt, so they can wear it as well, saying brother of the Wishmaker, or whatever it may be. But this conversation was one of those that quickly broke down barriers, because every one of the 62 chapters faced the same challenge. And when you get people talking about things they're comfortable with people who seem to be doing the same work as them, using the same technology as them, using the same terms as them, it breaks down a lot of the inhibitions which might limit the success of your collaborative plans. And this isn't just a case of trying to find people in different locations. We've often got people we might see as traditionally impossibles. Now, these might be people who work 4 hours a week, for example, in the retail environment on Saturday. They may be your engineers who are actually out being hands-on. They don't have time to sit at a desk and see what latest news has come through. You really need to be able to define a purpose for them to be able to come to use your site. You've got people such as nurses, for example, and we'll come on to talk about the March of Dimes, but as we saw with Kent Community Health, that if you can find a tool which makes people's lives easier, you're onto a surefire success. And this can even work with people like sales. And I've worked in sales for a number of years before I moved into internal comms, and I think internal comms always benefits from acknowledging there's a certain aspect of sales that happens when you're trying to do engagement. But salespeople are notorious for not filling in the CRM, for example, for doing everything but what you actually plan them to do. Now, one way to actually make this work is to get the sales guys to start sharing the content they have and experience in their slide decks on the intranet. So when I'm sat in reception at a prospect and that prospect suddenly lets slip that there's a member of compliance coming who's never been surfaced, for example, in the invitations, that I can go there and go, fine, I'm just going to have a quick look on our intranet now, see who else has actually had to pitch compliance and what type of conversations come out. It might just be that one opportunity that allows you to close a deal. But it all comes back down to getting your hands dirty. If you're not going to get your hands dirty, you're wasting your time. There's so many of us who, and I've been guilty of this in the past myself, of sitting in a head office and assuming we know how people work, or even talking to their managers and assuming the managers know how they work. But often we get that absolutely horrific experience back when somebody goes, we've not done that for 2 years. We've never done that. We never follow that. This isn't interesting. We're not going to read that. Getting your hands dirty lets you do a little bit more than just seeing how people work. It lets you spot those opportunities as well. And to really get excited and to start being able to tell people, look, I can help you a little bit with this challenge you faced, just by getting the experience of what their working life entails. And so what does that look like? Well, we can combine this experience of being out in the field with surveys. And when we do, we can start to build up personas. And what we've tended to see from more and more customers now we've worked with in our professional services is people actually starting to take these personas, printing them out, and actually talking to these personas as well. So they're actually imagining, what is it like, for example, if I speak to Laura or speak to Lisa? What would it Laura say to me if I'm trying to launch these comms and using these terms? What would she tell me? Would she be able to access it regarding what I know about the technology she has? When would I expect her to have it? And therefore, when should I launch it? If she's my target audience, we should move all the barriers out of the way to make sure she doesn't feel like a second-class citizen. And this can be an utmost success. And to do that, we need to start thinking about the devices we have as well, which will mean that, for example, not everyone has a laptop. What it might mean is, as Kent Community Health showed us, you might have a tablet, or actually you might have a smartphone. You may have no company technology at all. But that doesn't mean that these guys have to be out of mind. We work for a lot of retailers, and what we've started to see now, particularly for people who may have distribution centres, is that distribution centres traditionally have been a very tough group to reach. However, when we can get people who want to use the internet because they can start to see a benefit based on the requirements we've done for them, it lets us start to push notifications, for example. This is something we run through our mobile app that's highly effective. Previously, we saw a few customers who used to text message this group, but this has proved a far more successful way of getting that message out there, being able to fully version control what comes through as well, and make any amends as they're required. And it behaves in the same way we expect from our various social media tools in our outside of work lives as well. And with 23.1% in our experience of people coming in to use the internet outside of work, making it look like another very simple tool to pick up is absolutely critical to your success. So we've started to look at how we actually bring these different audiences into place and how we can understand them, how we might create the personas, and then how we might also create glossaries so we don't sound like a 1960s BBC broadcast, but actually start using the terms they use so we sound like one of them. But we also need to try and work out, often in comms, who's responsible for what. Because it's all very well understanding the audience and the terms they use, but we have so many different types of what we might call news or critical content. And how do we make people responsible for that? The Reagan Award winners of 2015 for their best intranet design was William Grant & Sons, and they've got a stunning site. One of the things they've done remarkably well is they've got people dotted across 16 countries and 6 continents. Now this might be a problem that you face yourself as an organisation, and the whole concept of global, although it sounds easy for anybody not in comms, can be a massive challenge for how you approach it. But the personalisation they do on their site, using permissions to make sure you only see the aspects which are really relevant to you, means you've got something that traditionally answers that what's in it for me question. So for example, the homepage will show both global news but also activity happening in my area. My timeline only shows people I follow, so again I'm personalising this quite heavy. And as we start to work for our locations, it's really simple. If I'm going to go and hot desk somewhere, I just click on a location on the left or a location on the map. I go into it, it tells me where I'd need to get taxis from, for example, if I'm flying into a location. It tells me what I need to do in advance. Do I need to make anyone aware I'm going to be in the office? It lets me book a hot desk, for example, as well, which can be absolutely critical when you've got a highly transient workforce. And they also use it to make sure that if you break away into teams, which we've discussed earlier, that those teams really hit what you need them to do. So this is an example of the HR area. Now, when you come to this area, you'll only see this if you're never a member of HR. This is the incubator. This is where, for example, you might define a new policy, or you might discuss a new program of work you're looking to launch. But it means that when you come back to your content areas, you haven't got lots of permissions flying around, that anything I see within the content area will be something that's relevant to me. Whilst anything which is in-house, i.e. HR to HR, is stored away in this team where we can have quite serious discussions without having any impact or confusion for the rest of the organisation. When we start to break this down, I've always used something called a Racy model, and it's something you may well recognise as we start to build it out. Now, what is Racy? It's a typical analogy. So Racy is R, responsible, A, accountable. So whilst the responsible person will be generating the content, who actually needs to be able to be in a position to be able to answer any questions, for example? C, consulted. Who have we spoken to about what we're doing with these comms? Are the people aware there's not going to be any surprises coming from management, for example? And I, informed. Who are your target audience? Who is it we want this message to reach? And whilst this looks remarkably simple, we often find with comms that we end up being very tactical, that we get a specific comm that comes out and we just respond as best we know how. But actually having a structure that says in this scenario we do X can be a highly effective way to go. So firstly, we want to understand the different types of workers we have. And this is just an example from an organisation. Your top line may look completely different, but we've probably got a frontline workforce. They'll have managers. Those managers probably report into a divisional head. That divisional head probably reports into a director. Alongside that as well, there'll be you guys on the intranet team, and then your team of champions that we've already defined previously. So once we've worked out who our different personas are at the highest level, we want to work out what type of content are we constantly pushing out. So for example here, we've got group news, we've got local news, we've got feedback from the front line, and how do we engage those through surveys to make that happen? We've got managers' needs analysis. How do we provide toolkits to make sure that they've got the ideas they need and the support they need when change occurs? And then the measuring success aspect. How do we know that what we're doing is being a big success? And who's going to feed that back to us? So in the scenario of group news, this is something we're all going to face. It might be global news in its purest sense. The intranet team are likely to be responsible, and by the intranet team that may expand out to the comms team, being responsible for actually collating that content and preparing it. The director may well be accountable for whoever's division it's in or whichever location it's in to say, this is the message I want to try and get across. We want to speak to division heads and also our champions to understand what the impact is likely to be before this message reaches our target audience. And then we finally work out who is it we're actually informing, who are the recipients, and then how will we measure how they use this tool. And again, we might do this for local news. This is something that we don't want everyone to see. This might be because there's a fire alarm test or a cake sale or anything which you deem as local but probably wouldn't push out on the global streams of your intranet. So your champions may be responsible for that, for your location representative. And they're going to speak to the managers to make sure the managers are on board and the managers know what's happening, as well as to get any feedback from them for what could make this a bigger success. Then we want to consult the divisional heads and the intranet team just to understand is there anything else similar happening that we can join together, and to make sure that the divisional heads are just comfortable this event's happening. People don't always like surprises. And then who's going to be informed? In this case, it's going to be our local news, but our board of directors in this case just don't need to be involved at all, so we can quite easily make them a dash. But as we work out our different types, we work out our different parts of our workforce, what we've suddenly got is a very simple model that says when this type of content is required, these are the steps we take to make sure that everyone's involved, everyone's engaged, it's relevant for our target audience, and we know we've consulted the various levels as required. There isn't going to be any question of where has this come from, as why has this happened, and this is why a Racy model is so simple yet so effective. So we've looked at how we actually start structuring those comms. How do we start measuring the engagement and feedback for the impact that this has? So if we take March of Dimes, they've got 56% of their employees are contributing on a monthly basis. And that's absolutely incredible considering so many of their people work in the field or maybe working individually at home. It's not a business model that lends itself traditionally to collaboration, but they're making a massive success. Like a lot of the organisations we work with, the impossibles are now becoming possible. And I just want to share a little bit more about how they've made this so good and how they've got that question of why aren't we doing this on Dimension coming through on their site. So when they started this project in April last year, they had 35% of people were using the intranet and actually collaborating. And that might be a very soft level of collaboration. It might, for example, just purely be liking or maybe sharing the content they saw. So they started to do a 30-day engagement plan. They wanted to make sure that during a period of big organisational change, how do we make this relevant for people? How do we get more people feeling like actually they can't just like stuff, but they're going to start sharing content. They're going to start being on forums, sharing their knowledge, helping us work better as an organisation to reach the successes we want to reach. So day one of the 30-day challenge said, say hello to somebody you've never said hello to before. Sounds remarkably easy, doesn't it? But all of a sudden, you've got everyone across an organisation starting to say hi to somebody with a hi, I'm such and such, this is how I work. All of a sudden, you've broken down one of the barriers of fear. We've moved away from that ask somebody on a table near to me and turned it into, I feel free to ask anyone in my organisation. They're all there to help me make things work. So when they started to do this project, they saw an initial jump of 5%, which is modest. It's a good start. As they came towards the end of their 30 days, 51% of the organisation were now actively sharing content, writing micro statuses, and adding contributions across the organisation. And as they've come out of this period now, towards the end of last year, that's gone up to 56.2%, and it's continuing to grow. That collaborating is now just seen as a core behaviour in the march of dimes. There isn't a case of, I'm not sure, can I do this, should I do this? The idea is now, if I get something and I've got a problem, I go to Dimensions. If I see a question and I can answer it, I go to Dimensions. If I need work to be done, I go to Dimensions to see how I can make that happen. And this will have a massive business impact for your organisation. I said originally we're going to help you to understand how to make a business case. Now, collaboration comes in many terms. There's a risk that sometimes it can be a buzzword. For the sake of today, we're going to define collaboration as anything which sees likes, shares, blogs, forums, comments, or even status updates. So it can either be actively sharing content, it could be actively creating it, or it might be that really soft purpose to getting people from being inactive to purely liking what they do. And we're starting to see some great figures. We've anonymized the data of over 1.1 million users who use our product to understand what effect collaboration actually has. So when 50% of our organisation on a monthly basis are at least once in that month liking something, they may be doing more than that. When we come to look at the impact on the business, there's a 12% increase in retention, and this is absolutely massive when we look at our recruitment costs, when we look at our training costs, when we look at our upgrading people and actually helping them to progress their career. How do we start getting more people to stick around? And we were measuring this by the number of licenses activated against inactivated in an organisation, which is a pretty clean measure of understanding what retention looks like. However, you might actually be a high performer, and we're going to go on to look at one of these very soon. And when you're a high performer, 95% of people at least liking something once, they might be blogging, they may be actively creating that content, we're going to see that jump to 19% retention, which is absolutely incredible. 1/5 of your organisation are going to stay around longer than they would have done previously. And that's a phenomenal achievement. That's one of the things that we really can tie into a business case when you're getting pushback to say, well, collaboration, it's a nice cultural piece, but what's the business benefit? What do we get out of it? And you can say, well, look, we're missing ideas. We're missing what our customers talk about. We're missing how we can improve our processes. But again, unless you can put a figure on it, it's very difficult. These retention figures will give you something far more robust to be able to go back to your stakeholders with. And as we start trying to understand how effective this has been, one tool that I often like to use is the employee NPS. So a net promoter score is something, if you've ever bought a phone, for example, you may well get an email saying, thank you for buying our phone. How likely are you to recommend this phone to a friend or colleague? And you'll give it a score out of 0 or 10 without really knowing too much about the detail. How it breaks down is if you score between 0 and 6, you'll be seen as a detractor. That's somebody who probably would go somebody else the next time they actually use your service. 7 or 8 means they're a passive. You did exactly what they expected you to do. Whilst 9 or 10 means that they were overly excited by what you did. They really thought you were highly effective. And B2B has been using this for years, but it makes sense for us to use the same start with our colleagues to actually understand how people perceive working for our organisation. So, for example, they may have given us a 7 for how likely you are to recommend a colleague to come and recruit for us. Why are we asking this? Because A, we want to know how engaged people are, and B, we want to try and drive down our recruitment costs, for example. But then B, how likely would you be to recommend our products or services to a friend or colleague? How proud are people of what they do? Because this is a great measure of seeing how people are talking about your organisation outside of working time. Are they there recommending to their friends that they should be buying the products or service you use, or actually saying, I really wouldn't touch this whatsoever. I'd go and use XYZ competitor to make this happen, which will have an impact on your bottom line and can be a remarkably difficult negative attitude to recover publicly. And then when we get these results, I often see people do global surveys and talk to me about their global results. And it really worries me because my experience suggests that actually there's no such thing as global. That whilst you can ask people the same question, the responses you may get may be remarkably different based on wherever they're based in the world. So you might choose to do this by department, for example. If you're looking to spot which people aren't engaged in what you do as an organisation, that can often trickle down from their managers. So let's work out. In this case, HR have got a remarkably low score, which I guess would be surprising for most organisations, but we thought we'd push it to the extremes. But you can see here that there's only one person who's actually saying, or one department who are saying, working at company X far outweighs anything I expected to do. We've got one department saying you're doing exactly what we expected, but a number of groups that are saying it's not that great working here. Now, what you often do is you won't just include the NPS question, you invite comments below it as well, so you can do the quantitative and qualitative data to come through. And as I said, with there being no such thing as global, it's very important to break this down by countries because you may find in some countries, for example, particularly USA in my experience, your NPS scores tend to be very high, that people are automatically viewing an 8 or a 9 as natural behaviour, and the UK is slightly behind that. But if you work with in other countries, you may find that actually the norm is probably nearer 5 or 6. And so using the same measure across the board helps you to understand what you need to do, but then breaking it down into your local areas is absolutely critical to ensuring that success. And when we start to get these terms as well, we start to be able to build up a keyword cloud. So we talked earlier about our personas and not just about understanding what work they do, but which terms to use and how to make that relevant for them. And in this case, we can see exactly what it is people are talking about. What are the things that are stopping people engaging? So it might be the 401k. It might be we want to hear more from our CEO, for example. It might be we don't get enough holiday, or actually I never get to take a lunch. Whatever it might be, once you start to pinpoint what these trends are, there's no reason you can't start to attack these and then start using the supporting evidence you got from your persona work, from your surveys, to make sure that we're actually echoing whatever our target audience is saying to us, both in terms of pain and what they want to hear. And so once you've started to understand this group, what we want to do next is encourage contribution. And I talked before about 95% of people collaborating, and many of you will be sat there thinking, that's never going to happen in my organisation, it's impossible. Well, let's take Sport England. Sport England are a Reagan Award winner from 2 years ago for best value to employees. And when Matt joined the organisation, everything was particularly siloed, as it is in lots of businesses. There was no essence there of somebody wanting to actively share their knowledge, that people actually enjoyed people coming to them and being known as an expert. But what they've done in just over a year is got 95% of people now contributing to their intranet. And that can take a number of guises. Now, it started as blogs. It started as people being able to share exactly what's happening across the organisation. But how do you get people to think that way? Because people often think this isn't relevant, or actually I'll do it later and never get around to doing it. Well, Matt found that if you had an option there to be able to share your news and tell people what news actually is, there's no reason for them not to actually start sharing what they see. So in Matt's case, he asked them why would they share the news? What kind of things make news? When is something not news as well? And then actually how to do those soft collaborative tools we saw before that's going to increase the retention and engagement of your organisation as well. And when you make it simple for people, it's much harder to resist and not doing it. As that momentum builds, as we saw in March of Dimes, there's more people doing it because everyone else who's like me is already doing it. And that's how we suddenly get that phenomenal shift of people contributing knowledge and information around the organisation. So I asked before for people to define a mission statement, and often when I ask this question, I get this response: what is your mission statement? And people will go, I've got no idea. And I've got a great one here. Thank you, Sarah, for this contribution. The fridge is where all the cool stuff lives. That's great. It's a great motto. It's something that sticks in the mind. But it's very good as a mission statement. What I'd say is, what is that cool stuff? How do you actually start to define it to me? Because we might see people saying, well, our internet is the place where people come to find the information they need and share ideas. And that's great, but it's remarkably generic. Would you get excited about that if you're the person who's being told this is what this new tool does to them? When we come back to learn our lessons about the terms people use, what excites them, what possibilities there are in their roles, we want to be able to roll something out so much stronger than our intranet is the place where people come to find that information. So what I always push people to do is start with a workforce statement, whether that's a sweeping mission statement for your whole workforce or maybe defined to each persona. But if we're looking for our workforce to share more of their knowledge, for example, to actively speak about how great we are to work for and how great our product is, then a very decent mission statement would be, this is the best company I've ever worked for, I feel cared for and listened to and have the tools to do my job, would happily recommend to friends and customers. If every employee said this, all our organisations would be far more high performing. Then we have middle managers, and these are the guys who are often forgotten, because if our middle managers are not on board, they're just going to tell people, you haven't got time for that, well this is a priority, you need to do this instead. So for our middle managers in this example, we're going to say our workforce are better informed and engaged, allowing us to leave a greater customer service and removing obstacles to success. So when I actually come to hit this point now as a manager, I'm thinking, great, you're on side of me. I can start feeding back either to the champions or to you guys directly exactly what we need to see to make this happen. And then finally, we also want our board mission statement, because it might not be enough to say this page receives X number of hits or X number of rewards have been given out on the site. What is this going to mean to them and what are you measuring for them? So the intranet is our platform for all communications across the group. Success is measured by percentage increase month on month of active users and the number of new ideas raised. So all of a sudden, collaboration's got a value. There's a very defined number coming back by the percentage that are adopting the site to make it work. And again, it's just making sure you're giving the audience what they need or what they want to hear to make sure your intranet's being a success and you're measuring that success in terms that they use. So that's taking you on a real whistle stop for our 7 points. There's going to be a whole series of webinars throughout the year, and I recommend signing them up to them, covering a whole host of engagement techniques, comms techniques, and more specific departmental challenges you may face as well as we go through. But based on the questions we've had today, a great question I've had come through is saying, should we discard our global survey results? We've just run a survey, we've just defined the various results there, and you're telling us to ignore them. I'm probably not the most popular person in your organisation at the moment, but don't discard the results. Definitely look at them, because there's always lessons that are going to be visible there. Try and see if there's a way of trying to define your audience to understand them by location or department. See if you can start getting that breakdown, as we did with the NPS survey. If you can't do that, start to look at some of the key pain areas. These results are still going to have some sort of value to you, but when you go to roll out your next one in 6 months, the next quarter, the next year, however you choose to do this, start to think about how you can break this down globally, and then maybe how you can break this down by your personas as well, so you can start adding some context into why you're seeing the results you have. Because you may find that a particular grumble may only exist in one location or one particular type of working group. So trying to roll that out globally will actually have very little impact for the amount of effort you're going to have to put into place. Instead, if you can pinpoint that group, you can target the comms around it. You can target the champions who work with them and really make that a success for them as they move forwards. So another question I've had is, what do we do if people work in a foreign country? Now this is a good question. I'm telling you to get your hands dirty. And this is remarkably easy if you only have to travel 10 miles down the road to see somebody in action. But what do you do, for example, if you work in oil and gas and you're based in East Coast of America and your team are based in Sudan, for example? How do you actually start to get that information from them? Well, it's really easy to actually fill out a sheet and get the guys to actually start filling in, what's your daily experience? What challenges do you face? So even though they're not telling you in a workshop, there's a host of very simple questions that allow us to elicit what it's like working in their scenario. It might be, for example, if you don't use the intranet to find people's contact details, how do you find them instead? What are the workarounds people find? People are very good at finding workarounds, but if we can improve the way they work, there's very little people not to engage. And I guess that really brings us to the end of today. I'm grateful for everyone who's gone and sent us mission statements and questions across. I hope what you've initially seen has proved useful and you've had some interest sparked by the various award winners we've shown, as well as some of the simple techniques that hopefully you can take away today and start to implement yourself. Any questions that come through now to the rest of the webinar, I'll look to either answer online or at a later date. But thank you again for sharing your information today. And you're not just stuck with the questions today as well. We run one of the world's biggest intranet conferences. And we've decided to split it this year to actually make it in 2 instances because we so often run out of tickets quickly. So why not make your way to London on the 10th of May? Start to share ideas with other practitioners, hear other success stories of making things work, and also discuss with our strategists and our trainers how they're seeing business change happen and which techniques they see to be most effective. So if you use the discount code you see at the moment, you'll see a 25% discount available. However, one piece of extra news is that we've got one last ticket for our 20 early bird tickets left. And if you sign up for that now, you'll get that 50% discount. However, there's only one left, so I really recommend moving quickly now to be able to get it. So I look forward to seeing you hopefully at Interaction in London. If you're one of our customers, I look forward to meeting you in our meetups around America throughout the year and throughout the rest of the world. And any questions you have, please constantly throw them back to us. Come back to us at Intranet Experts on Twitter. Start letting us know the challenges you face, and we'll look forward to sharing more of the knowledge we have. Thank you for your time today.